Hey, Tati here, and welcome to Calmly Coping. I am here with Jim Van Allan. He is a professional speaker with the John Gordon Companies of over 12 years. He has a PhD in education leadership, and he is a professor of communications. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Tati. It's good to be here. I'm glad to be with you and your listeners.
So, can you tell us more about yourself and what got you into professional speaking?
So I've always known I've wanted to be a speaker probably my whole life since, middle school, high school. It's just not everybody is good at public speaking, right? And I was blessed with that gift from a young age and didn't really know what to do with it. But I was always the one who was giving the presentations in the class and winning the elementary and middle school public speaking competitions, they have. And as you get older, you're like, well, what can I do with this? And how do I make money with this? How can I make this into a career? And I'd go to these conferences in high school and I'd see the keynote speaker on stage. We've all seen that motivational speaker type and just being in awe of that person and being like, that would be fun. How do I do that? But as you get into college, there's no major to be a professional speaker. It's all about life experience and stories. And so I kind of drifted a little bit between going the 9 to 5 route and getting a job in public relations, which was my major, and then still having that dream of wanting to be on stage and doing training. And I got hooked up with an author who was an up and coming author in 2006. Some friends of mine had seen him speak. I went to the University of Florida, and he lives in Jacksonville, which is only an hour and a half from where I went to school. So I emailed him out of the blue. I said, I would love to be a speaker. I was a junior in college at the time. How do I do this? And fast forward now to 2021, John Gordon and I are still working together. The author's name was John Gordon, and I'm the vice president of his schools division. And I've been speaking with his company for the last 12, 13 years. So it's been a journey, but it was one of those things where I had that dream. I wanted to be a speaker. I knew inside what my purpose was, and I fought hard to accomplish it and to make those connections and then to hold on to that and keep doing a good job wherever I go. So I love it. Speaking is, it comes naturally to me when I'm on stage, but it's not a natural role for me. To be sort of that extrovert, on stage. It's not that part is not natural for me. When I'm up there presenting, that is, but the personality side of it is not, for sure.
So that's really interesting because I think that, it sounds like you knew what you wanted to do from a young age. And I think that a lot of the times when it comes to public speaking, that's actually a lot of people's biggest fear. Did you encounter any fear, and like you were saying, tending to be more introverted, any challenges when it came to approaching public speaking?
The judgment part, right? So from an introvert's perspective, and there's the distinguish when you distinguish between an introvert and an extrovert, sometimes there's stigmas attached, right? Where people think introverts are these shy, in a closet, in a clam, like type person. And that's not the case. We just interact socially differently. Like I prefer more of the one-on-one style, small group style with people, right? You put me in a double date or a small group or a one-on-one with a friend, and I won't be quiet, right? I'll ask questions, have fun. But when it's a little bit bigger group, you stick me in a faculty meeting, like for my university that I teach for, I won't say a word, right? But if you ask me to come up there and present something, I won't shut up. So it's introverts we just interact socially very differently. We're more comfortable in a tighter knit inner circle type group. So for me, when I'm with speaking and with training, it's almost like I have to experience this personality shift, and I have to experience it, right away, where I'll go and come into the school, and the introvert is going to say, well, what do they think about me? And are they going to be judging me and so your thoughts are running much more rampant as an introvert, right? You're always constantly thinking about things that are impacting you, how others feel about you. And, you kind of get that heaviness on you, where the extrovert sometimes they thrive socially. They're used to being, the storytellers and being funny or just being gregarious and being in a group, and they kind of thrive on that. So to go from that life up to the stage is easy for them. And you can see it's natural up there. But for me, and maybe people listening, you understand the fact that introverts have to really work at communication skills. Like it is not, because it's not on a broadcast level, on a speech level, on a presentation level, it's not as natural. So I've had to overcome that over the years, where I have to talk to myself more than I listen to myself, right? Where I am actively speaking truth into the lies that I'm telling myself, that, hey, the lies are, you're not going to do a good job. Nobody's going to like the presentation. They're not going to listen. And I speak truth into that by saying, no, you have prepared. You have over a decade's worth of experience. You've done this hundreds of times, and you've rarely, if ever, had a bad experience, which is true, right? There's always been a few clunkers here or there, but if I've done 500 presentations, 495 of them I've walked away saying that felt good, right? So I always go back to that. And I think as an introvert dealing with some social anxiety issues, which I definitely have, I've had to really focus on taking ownership of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a great way of putting it, how you talk about that inner dialogue and how you can lie to yourself and come up with those judgments, especially when you struggle with anxiety and, social anxiety, and how you're kind of speaking truth to yourself. Can you talk more about how you do that?
As far as speaking kind of the truth to myself? Yeah. I think it's being self-aware is key. If you look at any of the needs charts and what on what human needs are and what the type of people that we want to become, and you look at the beginning of any communication textbook that I teach, it always talks about self-awareness. And that's been key for me over the years, is being aware of what certain anxieties that I have are, and I've gotten much better with it in the last five years or so. I've gotten much more of a handle on whether it be some social anxiety things and just being much more confident in those areas. But it's because I was self-aware of it. I was starting to recognize what my triggers are, and not avoiding those situations, because you're not learning anything when you do that. But being aware of okay, you may, if I have to go to a conference alone, and I have to go to one of those social gatherings where they have, cocktail hour or whatever, that, all right, I know I have to be mentally prepared for that. So I'm self-aware that I'm going to be feeling a certain way, and I can already sort of prep for that mentally and know that I have to go in with a plan and a strategy to do well in there. And it sounds, when I say it out loud, it sounds almost silly in a way, where you have to put in that much work to interact socially sometimes, when somebody else can just walk in and own the room. But that's not everybody, and especially if I'm not going with a buddy or a friend or something. When I'm on the road speaking and training, because I go into a lot of schools and companies, and we talk about leadership and communication and positive thinking and culture and all those fun stuff. It's me. There's nobody else coming with me. It's just me. There may be 500 people there. They're there to listen to me and my words and the words that I'm going to say there. So, I have to go with the strategy and know, okay, let's tell myself, speaking of talking to yourself, tell yourself to smile, tell yourself to breathe, shake hands, right? Ask questions. A lot of times, people always ask me, what's your strategy then? I ask a lot of questions. So it's not like an interview, but what that does is it takes the spotlight off me and puts it on somebody else. So as an introvert trying to operate right in an extroverted world and try to deal in these social situations, I've gone with the strategies people love talking about themselves. So I'll ask a lot of questions back about, how long have you been teaching if it's a teacher? What do you like to teach? What are some challenges you expect to have this year? Just asking stuff about, what type of speakers they've had, and just making conversation that way. And I put that up at the questions out there, and then you hope that they return the favor and they ask questions back to you, and then you're in a conversation, right? So sometimes conversations just need to be jump started a little bit. And when you're dealing with some anxiety and you're learning ways to cope with that, strategy helps. self-awareness helps. And, because self-awareness helps you to recognize your triggers. When you recognize your triggers, you can put the strategy in place to deal with that anxiety and not let it take over, and still help you to function and to function at a high level where people wouldn't even know. Mm-hmm. Because, if you ask friends of mine or people in my life who know me, if I've come out and said, yeah, I deal with some anxiety stuff sometimes, their response is always, oh, I would have never known. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to keep it that way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to that, what you're describing of like feeling that anxiety on the inside, but then other people would never know. And I want to touch on a few things you had said. Like you had mentioned that it's kind of silly to prepare in advance before a meeting, but I actually disagree because, as somebody who I've struggled with social anxiety in the past and have helped clients do the same, I think that can really help. And I think you shared a lot of good tips, like to have that self-awareness and to also just have things planned, like those little things of like how to be aware of yourself physically, like you said, like pausing, taking a deep breath, shaking hands with people, because that can help you to recognize how maybe you're feeling triggered in the moment and like physiologically you're starting to experience more anxiety. And also like those skills of asking people questions. I think that that's important to know because it's, like you said, it's a skill that you can learn. And a lot of the time that's what I think holds people back, especially with social anxiety, that they feel like there's something wrong with them, that like, I just can't communicate, or, I'm not as outgoing as other people, when I think there's that personality component, but I think there's also that part of it that is a skill that can learn. And I think that connects to what you're talking about when it comes to communicating.
Right. I mean, and that's a huge part of it. And I want your listeners to realize too, as well, that just because you have some type of social anxiety, like I've dealt with, and you deal with some type of anxiety, you have to understand that there has to be a level of acceptance too, where you're like, listen, this is who I am. Right. I mean, some of this is physiological, right? I get that. It's how we're wired, right? It could be in our DNA. Maybe you come from a parent or whoever, a long line of people who are like this, or maybe it's been an event in your life that kind of turned it a little bit. But whatever the case is, I look at it as like, I don't look at it as I have a handicap or disability or anything like that, or something that holds me back or a crutch. I don't look at it like that. I just say, all right, this is who I am. I've accepted that. Now I just need to put some things in place that are going to mitigate that for me. It's just something else. I like to live in my reality, right? Mm-hmm. And I want people to live within their reality, knowing that two things, though, knowing that you shouldn't be held back by it, but it's knowing where we are and not using it to complain or be negative or get down on yourself. My reality is I have some anxiety issues, right? People who may be listening, you deal with the same things. So you accept that. You accept that that's part of your reality. And now you say, okay, now what can I do? What can I do about this? Just to help me function better, or just have some personal development. I mean, my life is all about helping others experience personal development. I want our teachers and our schools to be really strong, amazing places, and the companies and the people I consult with, principals and people I consult with, I want them to be really strong, great leaders, right? So that's personal development, though. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're here. That's why people listen to your show. That's why they listen to my show. That's why we're here on this planet, is to, get better at this thing called life. And even though you accept your reality, you can still say, all right, now I want to get better, and I want to at least learn to mitigate this a little bit. So I think that's helpful too, I hope, for people listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like how you point that out, accepting your reality. And something that I've heard from like students and clients is difficulty with that acceptance. I mean, do you have any guidance on how people can learn to accept their situation while still wanting to engage in things like personal development?
I think talking through it, I think that's been a big thing for me is being able to be open and honest with close people in my life. Not every extended family or friend, but with my wife, with my family, just being open about this is what I'm going through, and I just need to just talk it out a little bit. And I think sometimes that can help you to just, number one, get it out, because introverts, we have a lot of stuff, and people with anxiety have a lot of stuff going on in our brains and our heads, and sometimes we bottle things up.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, it can come out in inappropriate ways, right? It can come out in non-verbally as well in those ways. So I think being open and honest with some key people in your life, if that is a significant other, or if that is a best friend, or if that is a therapist, right? I mean, obviously, and I've talked to people over the years as well, because sometimes when you need somebody, you just need somebody else that's sort of that, neutral party, just to be able to just, if anything, just listen to you.
Mm.
And the key word there is listen and not hear, because when you hear something, you're not actually listening. It's going in one ear out the other. When you're listening, you're assigning meaning to that message, and you can tell that person has listened to you and has listened to other people who are dealing with that. So I think that's helped, is some professionals I've talked to, and being open more with my wife and with my best friend, and people who have just recognized that about me. It's helped me to put it into perspective a little bit. And in our own minds, we always blow up our own issues more than they actually are,
Mm-hmm.
which causes even more anxiety. So the more you talk about it with key people, the key inner circle people, will maybe help you to realize that, okay, this isn't as massive deal as I made it out to be. And they're going to always be, because my wife will always be like, well, no, remember, you've been to this group, or you went to that group, or you did well here. And, and I really, and even just, they're just encouraging you.
Mm.
That's helpful too. Sometimes she'll just encourage, right. And be like, no, and not downplay where it makes you feel like you don't have something you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because that's not helpful, because you're like, no, wait a minute, I am dealing with something. But being that person that just, encourages them, loves on them, validates what they're feeling to an extent, the personality issues they feel like they have to an extent, and just being that sounding board. So if you can find that person or those types of people, I know that's helped me to get to a point where, I am much, much better now. And there's always judgment or fear that can creep in every once in a while. Like I have almost 20 in-person speaking engagements coming up in the next 4 months.
Mm.
I mean, that's a lot of cities. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of travel after a COVID year where we didn't get to travel that much. So I'm sitting there being like, okay, I've done this for a while, but I've been out of practice for a little bit. Okay, no, you've done this hundreds of times. You've done this before. Trust your instincts. You can do this. So that's been helpful, though, is finding the right people to open up with, which for introverts, it's not the easiest thing in the world to open up to people, but we will do it with a smaller group than we will with everybody. We actually seek that out, those personal, deeper connections in our relationships. We don't have time for the superficial relationships. We don't really want that as much, but we definitely seek a deeper bond with people, because we want that closeness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like how you specify finding the right people to talk to, like that difference you said between listening and hearing. That somebody that's actually going to be, I guess, taking in what you're saying and understanding what you're saying and validating your experience and maybe putting things into perspective.
And the perspective piece is everything, because, we see things through a very narrow tube when we look out into the world, when we look at our own thoughts, and somebody else provides that perspective and gives you almost the whole pie. And that's really helpful, but you have to be willing to open up. And that's harder for introverts. That's harder for people with anxiety, because you feel like you're going to be judged, or you feel like you're not going to be heard, or you feel like somebody's just going to like I said, downplay it to this extent where they want you to believe that you don't have something. So it's a difficult line being that person who's listening and to somebody who has some anxiety and things like that, because, and I know my wife, sometimes it's a tough road because it's like, well, sometimes she doesn't always know what to say, and that's okay. Right. I don't need somebody to know always what to say, but just to be somebody to listen to and just talk through an issue or talk through something and not always have to offer advice. I don't always have not looking for advice. A lot of times, we know what to do. We just have a hard time getting to that point. So we just need that good sounding board to provide that much needed perspective on things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, very well said. And I think that can be the case even more so than not, like just wanting to vent and get things out rather than needing like specific advice or a specific answer. And I think because other people want to be helpful, they tend to go to that place and, ourselves of like wanting to give other people advice and solve their problems.
And that's sort of, that's communication 101. It's an area I've taught for a while. It's an area I've brought up with my clients and audiences I've talked to of how to be a good communicator. Just be quiet, right? Honestly, it's amazing to think, well, shouldn't I be talking more? No. Listen more. When you listen more, you will get everything you need, right? And most cases, and this is especially much more true for men too, but most cases, the men's going to want to offer the advice, the solution, the fix to a problem, to an issue. I don't, whether that's instinctual. The man, quote, has the typical gender role of having to fix something. I don't know what it is, but so I always go back to, if they ask for the advice, if they ask for the guidance, by all means, okay, they're asking you, put that out there. That's fine. But if not, if it's more of a talking, I just need to talk about this, then just talk about it. Listen, ask questions, ask open-ended questions. And if there's room to, and if they kind of bring up the fact, what do you think? What would you do? If that kind of organically comes up, then by all means, take that window and run with it. But if not, they may not be looking for that. So they may not be looking for you to fix something. And I think a lot of times we listen and then we give a response back that's a story about us. And we do that to help us relate to what they're going through. But then remember that other person's like, well, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about me, right? So if you're going to tell a story back, just make sure that there is it's short and there's a lesson there. And I wouldn't even go that route all the time. I always try to just keep it on that person. And, if somebody talks to me about their kid or something that's going on in their kid's life, I try not to come back and say, oh yeah, that's cool. Well, yeah, my child's done that too. And they've done this. Like, then, keep the focus on the other person, ask questions, lean into them, from a nonverbal standpoint as well. And that's going to make the communication flourish just so much more organic and better off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great information to keep the conversation about the other person rather than the back and forth. Like, what do you notice happens with people when then you start talking about yourself when somebody else is coming to you with a problem?
It shuts it down. So it shuts it down. And I've been in group. So, we have a huge family where I live, where everybody's sort of on the same area. And you'll hear this a lot. You'll hear somebody bring up just a challenge or an issue or something, and somebody else chimes in with their own perspective, but it involves one of their stories, what happens to them. And then what happens is that dominoes into another topic and somebody else chimes in. And then that person who initially talked sinks away and is like, well, I guess that's it for me, So, and it shuts it down. So, but the more you make it about them and you validate and so you can, as they're talking, you can paraphrase what they're saying. You can ask questions back. You can ask clarifying questions. Keep it on them and try not to bring in your own perspective unless that's where the advice part comes in, unless they've asked something. And then you can say, I had a similar experience and here's what I learned. But then I always preface and say, but that was me. That's how I dealt with it. That's what I felt like I needed to do. Maybe your situation might be different, but I like to, it's called signposting as you're talking to somebody, I always like to guide them through it and be like, that's for me. Your situation may be different. It's what I did. So I'm sort of like always clarifying what I'm saying as I'm going, so it doesn't leave as much room for ambiguity. But you see that there's a lot of like steps involved in this, and how many people have been taught how to do that, right? In reality, probably not very many. So that's why I felt the need to do like a podcast like mine, where we're talking about practical communication, how you use it in everyday life, and things to say, and how to maneuver, how to maneuver in groups of people. So definitely make sure you ask those open-ended questions, you keep it on that other person, and don't just hijack the conversation, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's so important because, like you said, it's something that we're not taught yet. We use it literally every single day, like in every second, even in communicating to ourselves. And you had mentioned being in like a group environment, and you said for yourself that it's hard for you to speak up, let's say if you're in a meeting. Do you have any advice, let's say, for somebody who does have more difficulty speaking up in like a group environment, and what they could do about that?
So in that case, strike early is what I say. So if I'm in a small group, I was part of a men's Bible study for a while, and there's a big group of guys, and if I have a faculty meeting or something like that, I always tried to strike early. I always tried to talk right away. So if they're answering a question, raising my hand, and there's a strategy, right? We talked about earlier, where I went in saying, all right, I got to get in something early, because that gets me going a little bit. That'll, if I don't talk at the beginning, 10 minutes to go, I have 15, 20, 25, then I won't say anything, right? I'm listening, I'm present mentally and physically, but I'm not an active verbal part. So I think going in and saying, okay, I need to try to, if I'm in a meeting here, and it has to be a meeting where there's going to be conversation. It's not just a one-sided, where you're discussing something at work or a project, and I would tell that person to get a question or a comment in early, have it sort of loaded, ready to go, almost, where you can chime in right away, because those types of environments are a paradise for extroverts. They thrive in that. So your talkers will start to talk, and a lot of times in meetings or big groups, it'll be like, if there's 20 people there, it'll be the same 7-8 people talking, right? And the rest are just listening, because they're like, oh, okay, well, they're handling this meeting, I can kind of just slink back, right? And I would say, and that's something I try to do, and it was always helpful, is the more times that I tried to speak early, I was more consistent throughout the meeting, versus times where I sort of, I don't know, checked out at the beginning, then I sort of didn't really say much, or maybe said one thing in the middle of it. So that's something that I would do, and that always goes back to strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. And would you say, like, have you noticed, now that more meetings are online, now that we're doing more things via Zoom, is there a difference in communication when it comes to holding like virtual meetings versus in person?
The virtual, yes. I mean, I think in the virtual meetings, you can hide a little bit more. So even though, just because you're not there presently, you're not there in person. And, I've been on meetings where, I only have my camera on, right? And there's 25 people or whatever. And I can kind of check it. You can hide a little bit more. And so the virtual parts have been probably better. The introverts have probably appreciated that more, because then they can kind of, like I said, you can hide. That's what introverts want to do a lot of times in social settings. They want to hide. So, and whether that's verbally or non-verbally, even with their body language, they'll hide. So that's been, I've been in a lot of virtual meetings, and I'm the same way. Like I got to try to talk early, as if not, not that I get bored, but I get, I just rather be face to face too. I'd rather there's more opportunity for me to kind of chime in when I'm face to face, because I can, people who are a little more introverted can use their body language to say that they want to say something, versus online, the body language piece is missing. And if you have a good person in the meeting that's leading the meeting or doing that, they may recognize that you have something to say, and they may call on you, which is helpful. Then I don't have to raise my hand and everybody's looking at me. So the virtual meetings have definitely hindered some of that, but they were necessary, I think, and I think they're going to continue being an aspect of work moving forward as more and more people are working remotely, and more people are wanting to just communicate and connect and meet that way. So I think introverts just need to know that, hey, the chat box is there on Zoom. Use the chat box. If you don't want to, you turn on your mic, put something in the chat box, work within your reality, makes you comfortable. Private message somebody, and if you have something to say, get it in early, and don't be afraid to speak up and chime in. I think that's, introverts will kick themselves sometimes at the end because they're like, oh, I had something really good to add or say, and I just didn't do it, and then you're building more anxiety in your head afterwards. So,
yeah, it's funny because I've noticed that myself, where like, if I have something to say in a meeting and then I hesitate, then I start to get in my head and think like, oh, well, now it's too late to say it. Like I should have said it before, and people start moving on to another topic. And then, and then there's that self-talk of like, oh, I should have just said it, like kind of beating myself up for it.
Right. And then that's where the anxiety grows and stuff, where you're just swirling in it. And then the next meeting, you already have a little bit anxious about the meeting because you're like, well, I missed the boat last time. I don't want to miss it this time. And it's, so just trying to practice good self-talk when you're in those meetings. And like I said, trying to breathe and knowing what you want to say, so you don't have to kind of formulate it on the spot, or at least the general direction, and just trying to jump in early when you can. Especially if they open it up to discussion or conversation on that topic, try to get it early. It's going to help.
And you had mentioned that you have like a lot of speaking arrangement or engagements coming up, and that you still experience some of that like anxiety and nervousness beforehand. How do you manage that? And what's that like for you, still experiencing that after doing this for many years, and like, has it changed over time?
And that's the funny part of what I do, is that I always look at myself on stage, and I'll come off the stage and I'll be like, it was like a outer body experience. I'm like, what? Like, who was that? Right. Like, wow, that person was funny and energetic and lively and interacting with people and really, and telling stories. And so I think what it comes with me is, it's not that I'm like nervous about it or I'm nervous about public speaking, or it's nothing like that. It's just more of, every audience is different. So I may have 20 engagements coming up, and some of the presentations are similar, but every audience that are all in different parts of the country, they're all going to be different. They all respond differently. They're all going to be going through something different that day, a different day. I go to a different group. They're experiencing something different geographically as well. So I think it's just that is, as a speaker, you don't like a lot of unknowns. I know what my presentation is. I have my little brief set of notes I have no matter where I go. I have the presentation behind me, and I more or less am doing, I'm telling stories that I've told over the years, right? So I go back to that, being confident in the material. If I'm prepared, so I try to just be really prepared and know my material, and I try to anticipate the audience quite a bit. So, speakers want to maximize their control. I try to get to know my audience a lot. And where am I going? What time of day is it? Who am I speaking to? And then I can craft the message to them. When I craft the message to them, then I know that they're getting a message that's relevant to them. If they're getting a relevant message, they're going to listen. They're going to engage. They're going to give you good body language. Nothing like being up there and, seeing scowls or seeing people not participate or seeing people not react the way you wanted them to react. So the more I get to know my audiences, I know that. And I always ask too, whoever's bringing me in, I always ask, well, how does this audience feel about, interaction and engagement? And they tell me, well, you may have to work with this one. Oh, they don't really like that as much. Then I'll go back and adapt the presentation a little bit. So the more information I have going in is helpful, then I know what I'm walking into. And then I know I just have to execute. And I've let my instincts take over a lot the last few years, where I don't prepare as much from a content standpoint, I don't have as much stuff scripted out what I'm going to say. I just rely on, I have a direction, I have a heading I want to go in, I have the main points I want to hit, but I don't need to script out the stories anymore. I know I can tell them, and I know I can, I'm trying to rely more on my instincts, and that's helpful, because then you've reached a level of mastering a skill, and that fills you with confidence moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And so you mentioned like that level of preparation, which seems to be a theme in what we're discussing, like preparing for any sort of event or anything that you feel like might, whether it's going to bring up nerves or it's just something that there might be some level of uncertainty. And then the component of like mastering a skill, I think that's a good sign where in the beginning of any skill, you're going to have to try harder and have like, whether it's, a script, like you're saying, and then moving forward, it just becomes more natural.
Exactly. I mean, look at this interview. Like, I've done a lot of these interviews now in the last year, being on people's shows and having people on my shows and doing my own show. And, I'm looking around here, I don't have any notes, right? This is all just, and that's been helpful. And I'm showing myself that, hey, you know what, you've lived a long life as far as becoming an expert in this area. You can tell these stories. You don't need to prepare as much as far as scripting out everything you want to say, every joke you're going to make, or every aspect. You know what? Just let it flow, and that's going to come out so much stronger. It may not be as buttoned up, right, as if I had 9 pages of notes versus only having 3. But you know what? It's going to sound more raw and genuine in a good way, where people look at you and they're like, that's the real person. That's the real them, because no matter who you are, we want realness. And I know everything you're hearing here, like I said, we prepped a little bit before this, but this is just me, right? These are my experiences and what I've learned. And I'm hoping that's been beneficial to your listeners, who I know are listening to this because they have a need in this area, and they're coming to you and they're coming to your show to learn and to get better and to improve and to practice things in their own lives. So I get what you all are going through for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think it's been helpful just from what I've been hearing. And I think what you mentioned touches on the topic of like imposter syndrome, of feeling like even though you have all of this experience, you still doubt your abilities. And I think that's something that a lot of people with anxiety can struggle with. Is that something that you've struggled with before? And do you have any advice for that?
As far as the imposter syndrome there, I would say that's where coming into that positive self-talk again, where there's, we all have 2 voices in our head sometimes. One that's talking the positive to us and bringing us up, and the other one that's that negative dog that's kind of barking at us. So which one is going to win, right? The one you feed. So you got to feed the positive dog inside of you. You have to feed that positive voice inside of you and start speaking truth to that, and realize that they're just lies. It's just the enemy trying to distort you. It's just lies. It's not true. I can go into a speech and know that I know I'm going to do a great job, right? And I'm prepared and I'm going to have fun. There's always a little voice, like I said, that says, no, you're going to fail. And, or the audience isn't going to like you. That's when I get, the audience isn't going to like you, or they're not going to respond. And like I said, 99% of the time, 0.9% of the time, it goes great. It really does, and I have to go back to that and realize that it's just lies that we tell ourselves and that the enemy tells us, and it's not true. So it kind of, this is all going full circle, where I'm aware that that's going to be coming, and I have to not give in to going down that rabbit hole. And I think people listening, you have to try really hard not to give in to going down the rabbit hole of negative thoughts, because it's easier to go down that hole than it is to go into the positive thought area. The positive thought area is that narrow gate, right? It's harder to get into, but once you get in, man, it is paradise. The other side, where you're going to those negative thoughts, that's where that self-doubt will creep in. And, you're not reaching your full potential when you're doing that. We're meant for so much more. Like we're so capable as human beings. We all have such different skill sets and unique ability, and we have so much to share with the world and relationships to be in and people to impact. And I think if we learn to just get better personally and work on our communication and work on our anxiety, then we can be the best version of ourselves we could be.
Yeah, very well said. And I think what you were discussing with it's more difficult to think positively, I think that can relate also to what we were talking about with like mastering a skill. I think learning how to think positively can be something that you have to learn, and especially in the beginning, like really try to do. And then after you have more experience doing it, I think, at least for me personally, I think there's still some of that level of effort in trying to do it, but it does become more automatic. And, I'm curious if you've noticed that as well.
Very much so, because, thinking positive and communication's like a muscle, like anything, right? I mean, it has to be worked out. It's that you got to break it down a little bit to work it back up to strength. That's how strength training happens. You break down the muscle and then it gets back stronger and bigger. And that's how positive thinking, that's how communication really is. The more that you work on it and you think about it and you're aware of it and you're practicing strategies and you're listening to shows like this and your show, where you're really starting to try to take these things and these takeaways and put them into your life, then you're showing your brain that this is a priority, that communication, that these coping skills are a priority for you. And then it becomes more natural and more routine. You're not going to be perfect though. And I think that comes into play. I think that's where grace comes into play. That's what I've learned to do too, is show myself grace when I slip up on being a poor communicator, because just because I have a podcast about communication and teach it and speak about it doesn't mean that I'm an A+ at it. It just means that I am more aware of it and I work harder at it than most, and because I know the value of it. So showing yourself grace, it will help significantly in trying to, have be a good communicator and deal with these things. It's definitely going to help a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And would you say that you have any final advice for anybody who's, whether it's struggling with anxiety or they're an introvert and wants to know how to communicate better or think more positively?
Know that it is a process, and that just because you read one book, go to one seminar, have one therapy appointment, listen to one podcast, don't think that it's a light switch is going to happen where you're going to wake up and be like, oh, one book, I'm done. I'm better now. All right. You may feel a short high, all right, where you can take that information and do something with it, but know that it is a process. Life, this personal development is a process. Being a good communicator takes trial and error, because you not only have to get to know yourself, you have to get to know others as well. So you have to develop to be a good communicator, you have to develop almost like a sixth sense for reading body language, reading others. And, people who have anxiety, you have to realize that there's not one fix. It's going to be multiple things. And I wouldn't look at it as a fix. I would look at it more of just how to manage it, right? And knowing that it's never going to completely go away, because it probably won't ever completely go away. Mm-hmm. But through the process, you learn how to manage it, and you learn how to overcome it when you need to, and you learn not to use it as a crutch so much, so you can go out and live your life where you should be living. So that's what I would say.
Great. Yeah, this was a great conversation, and you shared a lot of great skills and tips and things that I learned from it as well, that I know that my listeners will find valuable. Can you let people know where they can find you?
Absolutely. They can find me on social media at Jim Van Allan, VANALLAN. And you can find my podcast, which is called Communicate to Motivate. It's everywhere. You can just search for it on any podcast platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, everywhere. Just type Communicate to Motivate, and you can find that. And there's weekly episodes every Monday. It's every single week. Even when I'm traveling, I preload them and they're ready to go. So just to give you quick takeaways on how to use communication skills to better your life. So look forward to interacting with all of you after this episode's over.
Great. And thanks so much for being on Call Me Coping.
Thanks, Tati. I appreciate it.